From Florence, Italy, the city of inspiration for sculptors in ages past and for centuries to come, you're listening to The Sculptor's Funeral. Good day to you all, and welcome to The Sculptor's Funeral. I am your host, Jason Arkles, a sculptor and instructor living and working in Florence, Italy, where all the great sculptors are dead, and I don't feel so well myself. And today, we're going to hear an interview with a sculptor who works in a branch of the art which I think few of us sculptors are exposed to. Heidi Wastweet is a sculptor who works in what I think is the most difficult genre, relief sculpture. I know many sculptors who have produced reliefs at one time or another, including myself, but frankly, I think most relief work done these days isn't up to a very high standard, including my own. For any highly skilled art, it takes years of effort to become really good, and few of us devote that sort of intense and prolonged study to relief. And then there's Heidi Wastweet. She entered into the study of sculpture with relief when she was a teenager, and she has been working in that genre ever since. Wastweet trained not in an art school or in a sculpture atelier, but under master engravers in various mints around the United States, and became an engraver herself at the age of 18. Since that time, Wastweet has produced medals and coins for private clients, as well as the governments of various nations for use as legal tender. She served as master engraver for 2 different mints in the United States, and currently sits on a Citizens Advisory Committee for the U.S. Mint in Washington, D.C. In addition to all this, Heidi Wastweet produces large-scale relief work and exhibits internationally, and is the second vice president of the American Medallic Sculpture Association, and is active in the International Art Medal Federation. Heidi Wastweet lives in California on the West Coast, and we had a conversation over Skype. She late one evening on the West Coast, and I early one morning in Florence. Now, it should be said that I am fairly new to using Skype for interviews, and so I hope you'll forgive the sound quality and background noise. I'll get better with practice, I promise. So before we begin, I just want to get my terminology straight. Do you describe yourself as a relief sculptor, or a numismatic sculptor, or a medallic sculptor?
Yes, all of those.
Oh.
I commonly introduce myself as a medallic sculptor.
A medallic sculptor, okay.
And I also do larger work. I don't just do metals, so I'm a relief sculptor and a medalist. Numismatics is a term that's specifically for legal tender. And I do some legal tender, but my concentration is on non-numismatic metals, art metals, commemoratives, that sort of thing.
So when you say numismatics are legal tender,
yes.
Does that mean you actually have made coin money? You've actually minted money? Have you actually made currency before?
I do. So the coins that are made by the U.S. Mint, the American coins in this country, are all created in-house by those sculptors that are employed full-time with the Mint. I am an advisor to the Mint, so I review the artwork that they produce and I give them my opinions along with the other people on the committee, but I don't do any of the sculpting for the U.S. coins. So any numismatic projects that I have are for foreign countries like Dubai, Greenland, Faroe Islands, small countries like that don't have their own mints.
Wow, Dubai and Greenland, you've actually made their currencies?
Yes. And while they're legal tender, they're not necessarily circulating tender. They're often just collector pieces. But you could spend them in that country if you chose to.
Oh, weird. I thought each country would have their own mint or something.
Yeah, it's an interesting niche that not many people are aware of, and I confess I didn't know anything about it before I started.
Well, actually, speaking about how you started, I want to talk about your bio. I read your bio, and it's tantalizingly vague.
Oh, no.
No. I mean, in terms of how you got your start, could you actually sort of describe it? You say that you declared your decision to be an artist at the age of 16, and then immediately became the head engraver? Chief engraver of a mint at the age of 18. That's amazing.
Yes, it is. And it came about in a very peculiar way, and people ask me how I got into this. I say by accident, like all good things. I knew that I wanted to be an artist ever since I was the age of 6, and I was very determined to be that. But in my young mind, I thought that meant a painter. as most artists that I saw were painters. I didn't even think about being a sculptor. But when I was 18, a friend of mine, his mother worked at an employment agency, and she saw a job opening for a sculptor. And she told me that I should apply. And I wasn't very confident. I didn't think I would get it. I didn't have any college education or formal art training. But she encouraged me to go apply. And so I brought my portfolio to the mint. It was a private mint in North Idaho. Mm-hmm. And the man who was interviewing, he was the current chief engraver there. He thought that I was moldable, being young and had a diverse portfolio. So he thought that I was someone that he could work with and teach. And there's no formal training for this anywhere in this country. So there's no possibility of hiring someone, especially a young person, that's had any formal training, since there is no formal training.
Right. Well, that's kind of something I want to actually ask you about, the educational opportunities. I mean, so it really is sort of the old apprentice style where you basically learn on the job. I mean, I've never heard of anyone in the, figurative arts or atelier movement getting any sort of training.
Now, some of the European countries do have ateliers and workshops that train medallic sculptors. I believe the Paris Mint and perhaps even in Italy. I'm fuzzy on the details of those, but I've been told that there are ateliers that are connected with the National Mint, so that they have their own sort of spring, for new talent to come aboard. They support the education of those young artists, and then the cream of the crop then becomes employees of the mint. And it's a nice system, and I wish we had something like that in this country, and maybe one day I'll make that come true. But for now, it's all on-the-job learning, and people who stumble into it like I did. And many people came to me as young artists, and I trained them as medallic sculptors. I've trained about 18 people. And of those 18, a surprising few of them continued on with it, because it is a difficult career. I'd say only 2 or 3 stuck with it for any amount of time.
Can you describe the process for me, Heidi, of working in a mint? I mean, what actually is a mint anyway? What's it like on the inside? Is it like a foundry?
It's not unlike a foundry. It's a warehouse, a manufacturing facility. To be clear, there are 2 kinds of mints. One we call a paper mint, mm-hmm. and one that is a brick and mortar mint. So a paper mint is a company that is a broker of metals, but doesn't actually produce them. They hire out the production. So a brick and mortar mint is the one who handles the metals. They have the presses that strike the coins. They melt the silver, take the process all the way from the raw material to the finished goods.
Right. So could I, as a sculptor, just bring a design to a mint and have them mint it?
Absolutely. Anyone can go to a mint and say that I want a coin made. Even someone who just has a vague idea and no artwork could say, I want a coin with a cricket on it, anything you can think of. And they will arrange for that to be made. And that's where I step in. Any of these private mints can then call me and contract me. Okay, we have a client that wants a cricket on a coin. Can you design that and sculpt this for us? Or you can come to me directly and say, I want a coin with a cricket on it, and I will connect you with the mint. So it can work either direction. If you, as a sculptor, want to provide your own artwork, the mint will usually have specifications for the size of your sculpture, the depths and the diameter that they would want you to stay within. But then you could submit to them your model, and they would cut a die from that, which is the steel tool that puts the impression of the coin onto the metal.
Oh, so it's like a stamp.
Exactly.
Right, the die is a stamp. Okay. Well, tell me, do you have a coin as a business card? It's the first thing I thought of when I found out about sort of what you do. I mean, I totally would.
When I told you about when I was 18 and the chief engraver who hired me, he did have a coin as a business card, and I have yet to do that.
I totally would do it. It'd be the first thing I do.
It's like the old adage of the cobbler's children have no shoes. I'm always at the bottom of the list.
Right. Modeling for coins, is it a lot like the historical process of Staccato Relief as practiced and was as sort of initiated by Donatello. Are you familiar with Staccato Relief?
Well, I have to confess I'm new to the term staccato.
Yeah. Well, basically, Staccato Relief is just where you compress the volumes of the relief rather than just flattening it. And when you do that, basically, when you shine a light onto a Staccato Relief, it's going to give you the same light and shadow pattern as the raking light would over a fully three-dimensional form. And it's the kind of thing that Brenda Putnam mentions in her book, The Sculptor's Way, and I think even Lanteri, I think he calls it something like lucky relief or something. He doesn't quite understand how it works, so he just calls it...
The translation.
Right. He just calls it sort of lucky relief.
Yeah, I don't remember him using that phrase, but I'm familiar with both of those books, since there are very few books on relief. They're the staple in my library. So you're correct. The method that Brenda Putnam illustrates of reducing everything in proportion does not work well at all for extremely low relief, such as coin work. So it's a lot more akin to drawing in that it is the illusion of depth rather than the depth itself.
Right. Okay.
And
well, that's what Staccato does. It gives the illusion of depth by perfect imitation of the light and shadow.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then, can I ask what your process is? How do you work? I've done relief myself, not too often, and I've had fairly limited success. It's just really difficult. So, if you could tell me your process, I'd appreciate it.
So for my work, I go about two different ways. For years, I only carved in reverse, in the negative, as my starting point. But in the last few years, I've changed that. So now I often start in a positive with building up clay on my base instead of carving directly into the negative. And it's just two different methods to achieve the same end result. But the bases that I use have a very shallow rim on it that I use to measure my relief. And then I push all of the images up as far as I can, so everything has as deep a relief as I can, but still maintaining that illusion of depth. So something that may be in the far distant may be just as deep of a relief as something in the foreground. And it's through the softening of detail, the atmospheric perspective, the plane changes that illusion happens. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So how important is the use of light in your working process?
That's a great question. I typically keep my light at about a 45-degree angle coming in from about 10 o'clock, if it were a clock face, and I have it propped up on an angled table. And it's important in relief, especially for coins, to keep moving the light around, keep moving the piece around, because when it is a coin in a person's hand, it's in motion.
Right.
And people tilt it around to get the light to reflect on it. So it's very important when sculpting to remember those multiple light sources.
Yeah. That was my experience when I sort of tried to figure it out. I think using Lanteri's method, I'd have light coming in from one side, and then I'd work it until all the shadows were matching, and then I'd move it into a different light, and it would be it'd look completely wrong. And so I would have to, then model it, from that point of view, of that light. And then I'd move it back to the first lighting angle, and it would be wrong, but maybe a little bit closer.
Yes.
And so it would go from, one side to the other and third sides until it all started to gel. It seems as though you really do have to work it like 6 different times from different angles.
For a while, I was using a turntable where I was almost constantly in motion as I was sculpting it. Instead of turning my hand, I would turn the plaster on the turntable. So that's another method of keeping the light moving.
Wow. That's a great idea.
And I wanted to add, you're familiar with the painter's trick of having a mirror in the studio. They will take a look at the painting in the mirror, and mistakes will jump out in a new perspective because it's instantly reversed.
Yeah. Sculptors use mirrors as well. Right. I use it in my studio. I teach with it.
So the technology version of that is when I send a photograph of these to my clients for approval, the photograph changes it yet again. So that's become my new mirror, is I'll take a digital photograph of it, and that will oftentimes pop out any mistakes. And then so that's my final touch-up, is I'll take a picture and I'll look at the screen and then refine the plaster some more until the photograph looks right.
Right, right. No, I find that's really helpful as well. It's just things pop out when you have just a different point of view, and a lot of times just a photographic image, a digital image, can provide that for you.
Sure.
Let's get back to modeling, and I want to talk in terms of composition for relief as opposed to other types of sculpture. For me, I have to imagine that the composition of a relief would have to be well, first and foremost, the question of foreshortening, I think, would have to be addressed. Or is it just, if you're a competent relief sculptor, you can foreshorten anything you want? I mean, how do you deal with it? How important is the question of foreshortening when designing relief? Do you take that into consideration when you sculpt?
I do. And of course, when you look at ancient Egyptian reliefs, they had everything in profile and very flat to deal with that. In modern sculpture, we don't want it to look like the flat Egyptian sculptors. We do need to have some perspective. And the rule of thumb that I have found is that subtle foreshortening is what gets you into trouble. Extreme foreshortening works quite well, but it's in those subtleties that things look truncated and shortened. So if you're going to bend an arm, bend it purposefully. Don't just bend it gently.
Right. Make it obvious, or else it's going to look like a kind of like a
short arm.
Yeah, short arm.
Or if you think of a hand coming at you, if you tilt the hand just a little bit, the fingers are just going to look short. But if you tilt the hand a lot, then it'll be very clear that it's foreshortened.
Right. Now, in your process, you mentioned earlier that you carved into the form, that you work in the negative as well. Is that correct? Now, how does that work? I mean, how can you model something in negative space? I just can't get my mind around how that might work.
It sounds intimidating at first,
Totally.
But once you do it a little while, then you realize how it makes a lot of sense. And I use a block of clay as I'm carving in the negative, and I'll push that clay into the cavity that I've created to sort of continually check the work.
Oh, like
see how it looks in the positive. So I've got a continual check method.
Right. Okay. So like a press mold.
Yeah.
You just take a little sort of a squeeze sample of your work.
And I do everything that's raised and thin, like a letter. I'll never ever carve letters in a positive clay if the letter is raised. I'll always do that in the negative.
That makes sense. So you get a raised lettering. So are you carving into clay or plaster or wax or?
When I'm carving down into the negative, I'm always using plaster, gypsum, and I have two different types that I use, a softer one, which is a pottery plaster, and the harder version, which is called hydrocal. And if I'm going to be taking a great volume away, I'll use the softer plaster so that it's easier on the hand and it goes faster. But then in the final piece, when I want a really sharp, clean line, I use the harder hydrocal. Right.
One process that's really interesting to me is striking metals. Can you explain that process? And more importantly, is this something that I could do in my own studio? I mean, could I just get some equipment and start minting coins in my own studio? And it strikes me as something really cool to do yourself.
Not yet.
Oh.
Yeah.
No. Okay.
It is. The old-fashioned pantograph machine is the method that was used for many years of reducing the sculpture to the die. I haven't mentioned yet that I work in an enlarged size, so I typically work in an 8-inch diameter.
Oh, okay.
Then the pantograph traces that in 3 dimension and reduces it to any size die. I can make any size coin from that same size model just by changing the ratio of the pantograph machine.
Right.
When I first started in this business, when I worked for Sunshine Mint, I had 2 of those pantograph machines that I ran, so I got the experience of cutting my own dies. I worked in all aspects of the mint, so I have a great technical knowledge, and now that I'm independent, I can concentrate on just the sculpture but I have all that technical information still in my head, so I know what I do on the plaster and how it's going to affect everyone down the line in the mint and what technical problems they're going to cause, who's going to be cussing me out on the production floor for how I've sculpted. As far as the individual making a die, it's just a matter of hiring a die engraver the same way you might hire a foundry to cast a bronze. You would hire a die engraver to make the die for you. Because the equipment is so cost prohibitive, those old style pantograph machines start around $10,000, and about half the mints now are using a digital technology where they're scanning the sculpture with lasers and feeding it into a CNC machine that drives a mill that then cuts the die. So that's an even more expensive process.
Any of those, are those old engravers still on the market?
There are, yeah.
Really? They're still available and you can actually buy them. It sounds a lot like a Colas machine. Mm-hmm. Are you familiar with a Colas machine? I can't remember how it's pronounced or spelled, frankly, but it's like an enlarger.
I'm not familiar with that term. There's a French-made machine called a Janvier.
Janvier.
Mm-hmm. And then the German machine that I used was an Augustine.
Augustine, okay. And they're still currently being manufactured?
I don't know if there's any new ones being built today, but they are still on the market. You can still find them. Oh, the ones that I use were made in 1934 and still as good as the day they were made. They're really solid machines.
Man, I would love one of those. I when I first started looking into relief and everything, and just reproduction, I decided I was going to try to make one myself, and yeah, well, I totally failed. But no, it's still interesting. That sort of stuff is interesting to me. Learning how to do it yourself, and I'm still trying to figure out how I can do a coin, make a coin in my very own studio. I get that engraving a die. Making the die for the coin involves a lot. And that's something I could get from a mint. I can go to a mint and have them produce that part, right? Well, could I then take the die, the stamp, back to my studio and then just get a sheet of metal and a big hammer and just start minting away? Is that possible? Or
the die is a very small, portable piece of hardened tooling steel, so you could take that with you, and then you would need, though, a big coining press to strike the actual pieces. Coins are not heated or poured like bronze. They're stamped cold with an impact press, so up to 1,000 tons of pressure to put that impression into the coin. So again, you need a specialized shop to do those strikings. Now there are some like turn screw, very old school presses that you can sometimes see at maybe a Renaissance fair. And this is it's not the modern coin making method, but it is something that someone could possibly do in their garage.
Well, could I rig up one of those those souvenir penny machines that sort of stamp out?
The rolling penny machines, yeah. Those are fun.
Yeah. Now, in addition to working as a medallic sculptor, you also serve on let me get this right, on the Citizens Coinage Advisory Committee, which is connected with the U.S. Mint, right? Could you tell us a little bit about that? What does that job entail? What is the where'd it go? The Citizens Coinage Advisory Committee.
The committee consists of 11 people with different specialties in the coin field. Mm-hmm. My seat is the specialty in medallics and art. And we have an American historian, we have a numismatic curator, and an expert in numismatics. And the remaining seats are representatives of the general public. Mm-hmm. Each person serves a 4-year term, and we go to Washington, D.C., and we meet between 4 and 8 times a year. And at these meetings, we review all the artwork for all the programs that come through the U.S. Mint. So not just circulating coins, but congressional gold medals, commemorative pieces, bullion pieces. There are many projects that happen at the Mint, as many as 30 per year, 30 projects. And so we review the artwork that's been submitted by the in-house artists, and there's an external stable of artists that do designs as well, called the Artist Integration Program. And so we then look at these submissions and we make a formal recommendation to the Secretary of the Treasury about what designs we think would make the best coin. There's another committee called the Commission of Fine Arts. They also review and make a recommendation. And then the Secretary of the Treasury takes into advice all of those considerations and makes the final choice.
Wow, it sounds pretty involved.
So it's quite a process to get an American coin made. It starts in the Congress and has to be made into a law. So it's a very long process, and so it takes years even to get it to the final stage.
So you have 4 years on the committee. How many years have you been doing it?
5 years.
5 years. How does that work?
I was reappointed for a second term. We can serve up to 2 terms.
Well, congratulations on your re-election.
Thank you.
I'd love to hear some of the projects that you've discussed on the committee, or is that sort of classified? Can you talk about it?
The meetings are actually public, open to the public.
Great.
The artwork is confidential until the public meeting, so we can't talk about things that we see before the meeting, but after the meeting we are free to talk about them. Some of the more interesting programs that we've done are the Congressional Gold Medals. We often get people who are very passionate about what's being commemorated that will come to our meetings and talk to us about what they've experienced. For example, the Nisei soldiers, which were the Japanese Americans that served to fight for this country, and some of them, while they were fighting, their own families were imprisoned in internment camps here in the United States. So that was quite a noble feat of them, and they were somewhat secretive in what they were doing. So when they were finally honored with a Congressional Gold Medal, it was a really big deal, and there were, I think, 4 survivors that came to our meeting and talked to us, and that was really moving to hear their experiences.
I imagine.
And we've done the American Indian Code Talker series, which strives to honor all of the American Indian tribes that served in the war as communication experts, and they spoke in their native languages so that the enemies didn't know what was being aired over the radio. And so we'll often get representatives from the tribes that come in, and they will sometimes sing traditional songs to us and talk about what their grandfathers did in the war, and that's always fascinating.
Wow, yeah. Now, you actually, in addition to the Congressional Medal, you created a personal work based on the Japanese internment camps. I think it's called Japanese American Exclusion. Is that correct?
That's correct. That was, I actually made that beforehand. So it was just a coincidence that I was on this committee that later reviewed the Congressional Gold Medal.
Really? So that came first. Oh, that's fascinating. Do you have a personal connection with what happened? Do you have Japanese ancestry?
I do not. So the way that came about, I was living in Seattle, Washington, and I was approached by a company there who was involved in a commemorative site on the original ferryway that took the first group of Japanese Americans away to the internment camps from Bainbridge Island, which is just off of Seattle, Washington. And they wanted 5 bronze panels to put on this memorial wall. So I designed 5 panels, and they had another artist that was also in competition for the project, and he designed 5 panels. And then the committee reviewed both proposals, and the program went to the other artist. And I think he did a good job. I don't begrudge the choice. I think it was a good choice because he worked in ceramic with glazes, and it showed up very well in an outdoor setting where the bronze really needs a strong artificial light. So I think it was a good choice. But I was so inspired by the project that I took one of the 5 panels that I designed and I sculpted it myself because I felt so moved by the subject. And I felt connected to it because I lived in the city where this happened. And it's largely untalked about, and I wanted more public awareness of what had happened. And at the time, I was working in a studio in a building that was the former immigration building, so it had a lot of that energy and that rich history of the people that had come to this country as foreigners and all the trials and tribulations that they went through. So it became a personal piece. And when I finished it, I took it back to the original committee that did the memorial wall, and they loved what I did, and they actually purchased it for a future site on the island.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite pieces of yours, actually.
Oh, thank you.
Can we talk a little bit more about your personal work and your large reliefs? Now, a lot of it, to me, feels like influenced by your experience in making coins, in the idea that basically coins have two sides, an obverse and a reverse. And a lot of your more interesting work is sort of two-panel work. And I'm thinking of things like your coin of Dante. Now, in that one, we see it's a two-panel sort of composition. You have Dante with his sort of head in profile, but with kind of like a cross-section of his skull missing a little bit, and you can see inside his head, and there's a little figure of Beatrice. He's thinking about Beatrice. And in the panel below, you show Dante's outstretched arm, and he's grasping as though he's grasping towards sort of his conception of Beatrice, and of course he's reaching towards a stack of papers, his own writing. I have no idea if I'm describing this well at all, but is it something more or less like that?
Well, you've described it very well.
Great, thanks. So for me, it's interesting because it feels like the second panel is there to sort of provide a richer and deeper context for the first panel. If that makes sense. I don't know if that's what the intention was, but for me, that's what I get out of it. When I look at the work, I see, you've got your Dante, and you get this idea, okay, he's thinking about Beatrice. But then it's the second panel that sort of refers to the first and sort of provides a richer context.
Perfectly, yes.
Yeah?
It's not unlike a coin, where a coin has two sides.
Exactly.
You can tell two points of view on the same story with a metal, and in those panels where I've divided into two parts, it's the same function as two sides of a coin, where you're showing two angles of the same thing.
Right. So do these panels arise as ideas for coins, or is it something that is just informed by your experiences in coins?
Yeah, I think it is. That my own personal studio work is often an outlet for the things that I haven't been able to do in the coins, because 99% of the coins that I do are commissions for other people. They're other people's visions, and I do love helping people with visions without the skill to materialize those into an actual piece. But then I get inspired, and I get my own ideas, and I have to get those out and do with the larger panels the things that are beyond the technical limitations of a coin. Right.
So do you think, I don't know, do you have any plans to convert some of your two-panel reliefs into coins or medallions?
Well, actually, Dante did get made into a medal.
Oh.
A Chinese metal collector group approached me, and they said that we love this panel of Dante, but we want to make it into a 3-inch art medal. Can you do that? It needs to have a reverse. So I made a reverse especially for that, which is the laurel wreath that we often see around Dante's head, which illustrates that he is a literary master. And so it's a very simple and clean design on the back. And this is a rectangle medal, so it's a little different than the round coins. And it was produced as a struck bronze medal and sold exclusively in China. And then I was given 20 artist proofs that I sold here in the United States.
That's so cool.
Yeah. And then I've often thought about doing the Japanese piece as a coin, having the faces on one side and then the taken away figures on the other side, which our listeners who can't see it won't understand what I'm saying. But...
Well, actually, can I ask you if I could put some of your work up on the website?
Oh, yes, of course.
Okay, great. We'll make an image gallery for this episode. So everyone listening, of course, you can go to thesculptorsfuneral.com, click on the image gallery for this episode, and see some of Heidi Wastweet's work. Now, in some of your other work in relief on a larger scale, you seem to have a real creativity and versatility when it comes to using the background of the relief in a creative way. I'm talking about works like Fruitful Ideas or Letting Go. both of works which sort of puncture or alter the back plane of that relief to produce kind of another layer in your work?
Right. I don't want the background to be just a supportive artificial plane, but I
Right.
want the figures, instead of being on the plane, to be in the plane.
Right,
And
right.
the two countries that inspire me the most are Italy and Poland. So I love the Italians for their sense of realism and the dynamics of the anatomy and the figure and the gestures. But then the Polish sculptors are doing some really innovative and wonderful techniques of this above and below the surface idea.
Do you have the names of some of these Polish sculptors we could look at?
Yes, Eva Boris
Eva
is
Boris.
the one that I first encountered that really opened my eyes to this and made me say, wow, I can really run with this. This is so inspiring.
Is she living? Is she contemporary?
She is, and she lives in, I believe, in Warsaw. She teaches at an art school there, and I've been able to, through the magic of the internet, connect with her a little bit and exchange some messages with her, which is really thrilling to really admire someone at a distance and then get that personal connection.
Well, speaking of admiring other works, as a relief sculptor, do you look more at painting or sculpture? You know, it's such a pictorial medium. I would think that I don't know.
I look at both, but I'm definitely very inspired by painters. In fact, one of the pieces I did, I modeled after a painting by Odd Nerdrum, because when I look at his paintings, I think, I wish I could sculpt like he paints. The juiciness of his brushstrokes are what I want in the surface of my sculptures. And as you know, in Italian sculpture, when you're working with Carrara marble, for example, what makes it so luscious for skin is that light goes into the marble and bounces back out. But when you have bronze, the light bounces off the surface. So to give some texture to the surface, bounces the light in a more abstract pattern, more like that of coming off of Carrara marble or off of skin, because a person's skin is not opaque, it's translucent also, so the light goes down into the skin and bounces back out.
Yeah, well, that reflectivity can be a problem in marble, because what happens is the reflectivity will wash out your darker shadows.
Correct, yes.
Have you ever worked in marble?
I have not. I'm intimidated by it.
Oh, no, it's easy, it's easy. Well, listen, what past masters do you look at and admire? I'm thinking of, well, not just Donatello, but the American 19th century sculptor Augustus St. Gaudens. I think his low relief work is just absolutely sublime, just amazing.
He is, and I think he is the benchmark of all the medallic sculptors, but I tend to keep away from looking at his work too much because I don't want to emulate it. The same with Art Nouveau, because I like it too much. If I look at it too much, I will start to emulate it, and I want to have my own style and my own expression that's more modern and has to do with the world today instead of looking back to those past sculptors. So I'm actually more inspired by the artists that I don't like as much, because I will find something there, I'll find a seed, and I'll say, it's a great idea, if only it were done this way. And that's where I find myself starting and then taking off in a new direction.
Oh, that's a really cool idea, actually. We'll hear more of my conversation with medallic sculptor Heidi Wastweet when the sculptor's funeral continues. Hey, podcast listeners. The Sculptor's Funeral is made possible by your generous donations, as well as by our sponsor, Blick Art Supplies. That's right, friends, Blick Art Supplies, the largest and oldest provider of art supplies in the United States, shipping their quality wares around the world. Their superior customer service, extensive selection, and competitive prices make them the choice for professional and amateur artists, art educators, architects, designers, students, and hobbyists. Virtually anyone requiring quality art materials for work or for pleasure. And seriously, there isn't another art supplier on the web with as many supplies and materials specifically for sculptors than Blick. It's really huge. They have over 70,000 products for artists of all types. You can get everything you need, from dozens of different clays and plasters to fine Italian marble carving tools, clay modeling tools, specialty casting mediums, body casting supplies, turntables, armatures, books on sculpture, you name it. If you need it for sculpture, they got it. And shipping is free in the U.S. for most items if your order is over $100. But Blick is not merely a place to buy stuff. Their sales staff and product information specialists are trained to hunt down answers to your tough questions regarding materials, techniques, and safety. Hundreds of Blick videos are also available at dickblick.com and on YouTube, including video lesson plans for teachers and product demonstrations for artists. And best of all, by buying your art supplies from Blick, you contribute directly to the support of the Sculptor's Funeral podcast. All you need to do is this. Go to the podcast website, thesculptorsfuneral.com, and click on any of the banner links that you see there. And that will take you right to the Blick website where you can buy whatever you need. It's that simple. Just remember that you need to click through a link on thesculptorsfuneral.com first so that Blick knows I sent you. So the next time you stock up on armature wire, mold rubber, modeling tools, and plastilina, do it in a way that supports the only podcast out there devoted to the global community of figurative sculpture. Go to thesculptorsfuneral.com and click on Blick and support the show. Thanks. Now, Heidi Wastweet, in the U.S., we have struggled with dollar coins. We don't really like them. Americans don't really like them. And why is that? Why is, for instance, the latest, the Sacagawea coin, why is it proving to be so unpopular? Is it the art?
Yeah, I don't think the artwork had anything to do with the popularity or lack of popularity of that coin. It comes down to economics and politics and people's mindsets.
Their mindsets. So, like, people just don't want the dollar to be part of their sort of loose change. It has more value, sort of thing.
Yeah, the main problem with the dollar coin in the United States is that they're trying to run a dollar bill alongside it. And if you look at all the other countries that have successfully integrated a dollar coin or $2 coins, like Canada, the thing that they did is they subsequently stopped producing the dollar bill. So that's the thing that is the missing link. As soon as they decide to stop making the paper dollar, then the coin will have a place and a function and people will adopt it.
Well, then why hasn't the U.S. stopped printing dollar bills if that's so obviously the problem causing it to fail?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. The main reasons, the political reasons, are the lobbyists who want to keep the paper companies producing the paper for the dollar bill, and the cotton growers that want to supply the cotton for the paper, the ink suppliers. They all lobby Congress to keep that going. And on the other side, you have the copper mines and the metal producers that want to supply metal for the coins that are lobbying on the other side. And so far, the lobbyists are winning on the side of the paper. And the American people also are not fully informed about the advantages of having the coin instead of the paper. They have a mental mindset that the paper dollar is somehow worth more. They think it's more convenient. They think it's lighter in their pocket. But as a European, you've experienced firsthand having a higher denomination coin, and you understand that as a consumer, you just adapt to that new system.
Well, I never thought of it that way. It's interesting. It's a lot easier for me to spend €1 or €2, because we have the €2 coins, than it would be to spend an American dollar, even though it's worth so much less. I think it's just, just like, it's change. It's just coins. It's just in my pocket with all the little pennies, right?
Right. It's easier to just throw it down.
Yeah, exactly. It's really weird. I never looked at it in that.
Gotta hang on to the bill.
Right. Exactly. I'll hang on to my €5 notes or my €10 notes, but I'll easily spend €5 in pocket change. That's kind of fascinating.
That's a good personal view, yes. And the other reason to switch, though, is what it does for the greater economy. So if we made that simple change, we stopped making the paper dollar and switched to the coin, it would save the taxpayers approximately $1 billion per year over the next 30 years.
Really? Why is that? How is that?
Because the coin lasts longer, it's more economical to make.
Well, how much longer does a coin last? How long is a
Yes.
coin usually in circulation?
Well, the dollar coin, I think they said, and I hesitate to say because I don't remember off the top of my head, but I think it was up to 20 years, where a paper dollar will only circulate up to 2 years.
Really, just 2 years?
Yeah, they wear out quite quickly and have to be replaced. And furthermore, if they dropped the penny, which, you can't buy anything for a penny anymore, but we still have them, whereas our half pennies were done away with a long time ago. If we simply dropped the penny the way Canada is, we would save $250 million in taxpayer money every year. And that's without cutting any programs or taxing anyone. That's just money in the bank. But the average citizen doesn't know that.
And it's just the lobbying interests that keep these changes from happening. Big paper, right, and big copper or big zinc.
Well, there's been a number of polls conducted where these polling companies will call people randomly and say, do you prefer a paper dollar or a coin dollar? But they won't explain the advantages of switching. And because people are creatures of habit, they will say, well, I like the paper dollar. I want to keep the paper dollar.
Right. And of course, these polls are conducted on landlines, right? So it's like all the, 60 and above set that are going to be voting for their old trusty dollars.
So I've been quite outspoken about wanting to switch to the coin, not just because I like coins, because I'm also in favor of dropping the penny, but just because it would save so much money in our government, where we're in considerable debt as it is. Every bit counts.
Yeah. So tell me what you have going on at the moment. Now, I know this spring you were the artist in resident at Brookgreen Gardens in South Carolina. Is that correct?
Yes, that was a blast. I got to spend 2 weeks as the artist in residence at Brookgreen Gardens in South Carolina.
So cool.
Have you been? Oh.
Yeah. I used to live in North Carolina and I'd go down.
Oh,
It's incredible.
It's the largest collection of outdoor sculpture in the entire world, which is really impressive. And so it was great to spend that time there just roaming through the grounds and getting inspired by the sculptures. And I produced 2 sculptures while I was there, plus I did a little portrait demonstration for my workshop, which was it was a 3-day workshop. And I hope I'll teach there again because I really enjoyed it. And I will go back again next year for a group exhibit of resident artists.
So, apart from this, do you teach or give workshops regularly in your own studio? Do you take in students for any length of time?
This was actually the first time that I taught a workshop or a formal class. Every time that I've taught in the past, it's just been one-on-one in an apprenticeship type situation where someone came to work for me and learned as they worked. So I haven't done any formal classes or formal teaching. But I'm a big believer in open exchange of information, especially among artists. And in this industry where there is no school for this to be learned, I'll sometimes get emails from artists who want to know something about relief sculpture, and I'm always open to telling them absolutely everything that I can think of. And I have pages on my website called the Mode page, where I have illustrations of different techniques that I use and lots of photographs of the different stages. And I will continually add to that on my website as an open resource for other artists.
Yeah, I love that part of your website. I thought that was great.
Oh.
Yeah. And do you have a YouTube channel?
I do, yes.
Yeah, and what's the name of your YouTube channel so I can direct our listeners to it to see some of your videos?
I think it's just my name.
Okay. Heidi Wastweet.
Nothing fancy.
All right. Wastweet.
Wastweetstudio.com, yeah.
Wastweet. Okay. And your website is wastweetstudio.com. Okay, great. So if someone, if a sculptor is looking for more formal education in medallic arts in the United States, where would you tell them to go? Where can someone look for an educational opportunity?
There is another artist, a fantastic sculptor, Eugene Daub, here in California. I consider him my mentor, and he does workshops quite regularly. He does them at the Scottsdale Artist School and a few other locations. So several times a year he'll do classes in sometimes sculpture in the round, sometimes in relief, sometimes specifically medallic sculpture, and usually in a 1-week format. So if people are looking for some classes that I can't give them, then I'll refer them to Eugene's schedule. And he's an excellent teacher. He's very personable.
Do you have any workshops coming up in your own studio?
I don't have anything scheduled now, no, but hopefully in the future.
Because I think relief sculpture is something that a lot of sculptors would try if they had the possibility, if they were exposed to the possibility of learning it from a professional.
I would love to inspire more people to do relief because I think it's such a wonderful medium that isn't used as much as it was, say, in the Renaissance. And I am at a loss of why more people don't do it, because I think it's so amazing that it combines the sculptural techniques with the drawing techniques, and going below the surface and above the surface, having landscapes which you can't achieve necessarily in a sculpture in the round. So I'd love to see more people doing it.
Well, speaking of the visibility of medallic arts, I don't know, I've never seen it really as a functioning part of the gallery system. I've never gone into a commercial art gallery and seen, sort of a curio cabinet full of medals and coins. How do coin medallic artists show their work outside of the gallery system? I mean, how do collectors find you? I mean, I've never. Are there sort of like conventions or expos, or are there sort of groups like a Medallic Arts Society?
Well, that's a great question. There are two really good resources. There's the American Medallic Sculptor Association in the States, but anyone can join. I'm on the board of directors there, and I run the website. So it's a showcase for people who do art medals, so not necessarily numismatic, but also numismatic. It does focus on the art medals and pushing the edges of what medals are and exploring all the possibilities of the medium. And it's a great group of people that encourages each other. We have a newsletter that goes out quarterly, and we're also connected to an international organization called FIDEM, FIDEM, which is a National Federation of Art Medalists. And they hold a congress every 2 years, and each congress is held in a different country. The next one will be in Belgium in 2016. And they will have a large exhibit of art medals from around the world. The last one I went to was in Scotland, and I think it had over 100 different countries represented. It was just an amazing resource of all these art medals, more than you could ever imagine even exist.
So this Congress, is it just for the artists to get together and show their work to each other, or collectors welcome? Or?
Yes, it's for collectors and artists both. Yeah. And I've sold art medals through galleries as well as through my website and online. So it's a pretty small industry, so everybody knows everybody and the collectors know how to find us.
And you're able to make it work with that?
Hopefully. Like to think so.
Right. Now, you're also involved with the National Sculpture Society, is that correct?
Yes, National Sculpture Society is another wonderful resource, and there are some members that carry over from FIDEM and the American Medallic Sculpture Association that are also members of the National Sculpture Society.
You see, I didn't realize that the NSS had anything to do with the medallic arts or medallic artists.
Yeah, and a few years ago we did a joint symposium with the National Sculpture Society and the American Medallic Sculpture Association at Brookgreen.
Brookgreen Gardens.
Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful site.
And of course, they have one of the largest collections of art medals there.
Yeah, they do.
Brookgreen.
Yeah, I've seen it.
And there's one of mine in there.
Awesome. I'll have to check it out next time I'm down.
Next time you'll have to
Yeah, definitely.
take a look for that.
That's so cool. Well, Heidi Wastweet, thank you so much for talking with me today. It's been a really, really enlightening thing. I learned a lot about what you do. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode with Heidi Wastweet. Please check out the image gallery at thesculptorsfuneral.com for images of Wastweet's work, as well as her own website, wastweetstudio.com, where you can find links to her YouTube channel and her informative videos. You can also find a bit of her work on our Facebook group page, so the next time you're on Facebook, become a member and join in the conversation. And don't forget, you can find the complete archives of the podcast at thesculptorsfuneral.com. You can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes and Stitcher and any other podcasting app you may have. We'll be back next week with a brand new episode, and I hope you'll be there to hear it. And until then, thanks again for listening, and have a productive week.